At Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, there is a restricted collection of Mesopotamian artifacts. Most visitors pass through without stopping, but within that collection, according to secondary research accounts, there is a piece cataloged as YBC 7194, a fired clay tablet said to be approximately 4,200 years old. What is written on it, according to these accounts, is not a commercial contract, not a grain inventory, not a legal judgment. According to a proposed translation that circulated in limited form beginning in the late 1980s, YBC 7194 contains something categorically different. A document framed as a predictive account, one that names specific figures, describes a sequence of events, and uses astronomical calculations to identify a time period that its authors described as the future. Some alternative researchers who have engaged with this material have proposed that the time period the tablet calculated corresponds to the present day. These are extraordinary claims, and they deserve to be treated with proportionate care. They are drawn from an account and a proposed translation that have not been verified through mainstream peer-reviewed Assyriology. The tablet's catalog number, YBC 7194, has not been independently confirmed as matching the document described in these accounts through publicly available Yale Babylonian collection records. Everything that follows is an exploration of these claims as they exist in secondary and alternative research literature, not a presentation of established historical or astronomical fact. Before we go further, if this kind of historical and archaeological exploration is what you're here for, subscribe now. Every week this channel examines texts, tablets, and interpretive debates that sit at the edges of mainstream scholarship. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. To place these claims in context, it is worth establishing what mainstream scholarship does and does not document about predictive or astronomical texts in the ancient Mesopotamian tradition, because the genuine history of Babylonian and Sumerian astronomical knowledge is remarkable on its own terms. What is not in dispute? Ancient Mesopotamian civilization produced some of the most sophisticated astronomical records in the ancient world. Babylonian astronomers, working from real observational data over centuries, developed genuine predictive models for celestial events. Tablets documenting planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and stellar configurations have been recovered in large numbers from Mesopotamian sites, and many are held in major museum collections, including the British Museum, the Louvre, and the Yale Babylonian Collection, which is a real institution with a real and extensively studied cuneiform archive. What is also documented? Mesopotamian omen literature, a real and widely studied genre, did connect astronomical configurations to predicted earthly events, including the activities and fortunes of rulers. This genre is well attested, well translated, and actively studied within mainstream Assyriology. What is not supported by any peer-reviewed Assyriological source is the specific claim, now being explored, that a particular tablet uses astronomical calculation to predict the return of specific Anunnaki figures to Earth during a specific calculable modern time window. This claim exists entirely within alternative research literature and is absent from mainstream scholarship. The Yale Babylonian Collection has not publicly confirmed the existence of a tablet matching the described content of YBC 7194 in the form outlined in these accounts. With that context established, here is what tablet YBC 7194 is claimed to contain. The excavation origin of the tablet is described in these accounts as Larsa, a real and extensively excavated ancient Sumerian city in southern Iraq, genuinely one of the major urban centers of the early 2nd millennium BC. Larsa is a real site with a real archaeological record, and genuine tablets from Larsa excavations are held across multiple major collections. The claim that this specific tablet originated there in 1920s excavations has not been independently confirmed through published excavation records. According to this account, a complete translation was completed in 1986 by an Assyriologist identified as Dr. Piotr Steinkeller of Harvard University, a real scholar whose published work in Sumerian and Akkadian studies is documented within mainstream Assyriology. It is important to be direct here. The claim that Dr. Steinkeller produced a translation of YBC 7194 with the content described to these accounts concluded that its implications were outside any standard interpretive framework and chose not to publish it. has not been verified. No such unpublished translation matching this description has been confirmed through Harvard University records or through Dr. Steinkeller's documented published bibliography. The use of a real scholar's name in an unverified account is a feature that viewers should be aware of when evaluating the credibility of the surrounding claims. According to the proposed translation as it has circulated in secondary literature, the tablet's text is structured in 4 sections. The first section, per this proposed reading, establishes what the text frames as a context for what follows, the withdrawal of the Anunnaki from direct presence on Earth. According to this interpretation, the text describes this withdrawal not as abandonment, but as what it calls a strategic repositioning. The members of a council moving to positions from which they could observe human development without direct intervention, with the expectation of returning during specific windows when human development reached stages requiring renewed attention. It is worth noting plainly, the concept of divine or advanced figures withdrawing from direct earthly involvement and returning at a future time is a theme found across many ancient religious and mythological traditions worldwide, and is generally read by mainstream scholars of comparative religion as reflecting recurring human responses to questions about divine absence and eventual return, rather than as evidence of a literal planned event documented in a specific administrative record. Whether this tablet's framing reflects an authentic ancient variant of that recurring theme, or is a more recent construction drawing on it, is a question the unverified status of the account cannot resolve. According to the proposed translation, the first section also describes an astronomical calculation used to establish the return window. Some alternative researchers who have attempted to reconstruct this calculation using modern astronomical data have proposed that the resulting window opens in the late 20th century and extends through the first half of the 21st century. This proposed reconstruction has not been peer-reviewed, and the astronomical methodology underlying it has not been independently verified by specialists in either ancient Mesopotamian astronomy or modern archaeoastronomy. The second section of the proposed translation, according to this account, names the first figure said to return, identified in the text as Marduk. Marduk is a genuinely real and extensively documented figure in Babylonian religious literature, where he occupies a central position in the Babylonian pantheon, particularly from the Old Babylonian period onward. The Enuma Elish, a genuine, well-studied Babylonian creation text, features Marduk prominently. His role in authentic Babylonian religious and political thought is documented in mainstream Assyriological literature. According to the proposed translation, the tablet provides a specific rationale for why Marduk would return first. He is described as having maintained what the text calls operational presence during the entire period of withdrawal, remaining closer to Earth and other council members and monitoring specific locations where what the text calls the infrastructure of the Anunnaki had been installed during the active period. The proposed translation also attributes to Marduk a specific voting record within the council described by the text, including opposition to a proposed destruction of Mars, opposition to the flood, and a consistent pattern described as supporting continued engagement with humanity over multiple deliberative sessions. These are specific, detailed claims within the proposed translation, and they rest entirely on the unverified account. None of this content has been confirmed through any independently authenticated Babylonian or Sumerian text. The third section of the proposed translation is described in secondary accounts as the most technically specific portion of the text. According to this reading, the tablet uses the same astronomical methodology documented in real Babylonian predictive texts, configurations of visible planets, stellar positions relative to the seasonal cycle, and the precession of the equinoxes to calculate the return window. When these markers are, according to some alternative researchers, calculated against modern astronomical data, they produce a window that is described as currently active. Some researchers who engage with this material have proposed that the tablet also describes 3 categories of observable signs associated with the approach of this window: unexplained atmospheric anomalies, seismic activity outside standard predictive models, and behavioral changes in certain animal species. According to this proposed reading, the text frames these animal behavioral changes in terms of species retaining a perceptual capacity that humans no longer possess, the ability to detect frequencies or presences that human sensory systems are no longer calibrated to register. It is worth addressing this section with particular care, because it involves a rhetorical move that viewers deserve to be aware of. The three categories of phenomena described, atmospheric anomalies, unusual seismic activity, and animal behavioral changes, are all real, documented areas of ongoing scientific study, with genuine unexplained cases within each. The proposed translations claim that these phenomena are signs of an approaching return, described in a 4,200-year-old tablet, connects an unverified ancient text to real modern observations in a way that can make the connection feel more persuasive than the evidence supports. Real unexplained phenomena exist. That existence does not verify the interpretation offered for them by an unconfirmed tablet. These are two separate questions, and conflating them produces a misleading impression of convergent evidence. The fourth section of the proposed translation describes the order in which other council figures are said to return after Marduk, and what each arrival would involve. According to this proposed reading, Enki, a genuinely well-documented figure in authentic Sumerian and Babylonian religious literature, where he is associated with wisdom, water, and creation, would arrive second. The proposed translation describes his return as involving a direct assessment of how humanity had developed, since what the text frames as his earlier modifications to human biology, and potentially a difficult reckoning with the consequences of what the text calls unauthorized interventions he had carried out on humanity's behalf. A figure identified as Ninhursag, also genuinely documented in Sumerian texts, where she is associated with healing and birth, is described in the proposed translation as arriving third, conducting what the text frames as a biological assessment of human development, including conditions the text suggests the original design did not anticipate. Finally, the figure identified as Anu, described across authentic Sumerian texts as the head of the divine assembly, is described in the proposed translation as arriving last, after receiving reports from the preceding three, to make what the text calls a deliberative decision about the future of engagement with humanity. The proposed translation describes the possible outcomes as including continued engagement, restoration of capabilities described as having been removed before the withdrawal, formal recognition of independent human development, or the ending of engagement entirely. It is important to state plainly all of these specific claims, the order of arrival, the described purposes of each figure's return, the deliberative structure, and the possible outcomes, are drawn entirely from an unverified proposed translation circulating in alternative research literature. None of this content has been confirmed through any independently authenticated ancient text. The proposed translation's final section, according to this account, contains a passage addressed directly to readers in what it describes as the calculated return period. Researchers who have circulated this translation present this passage as among its most striking features, a direct address across 4,200 years from scribes who, according to this reading, understood they were writing for a future audience that would have forgotten the original context entirely. According to the circulated translation, this passage states that Marduk's arrival may not be dramatic, that he has maintained presence during the entire period of withdrawal, and that his return represents a transition from observation to engagement rather than a sudden appearance from elsewhere. It describes the observable conditions as subtle, and states that institutional confirmation should not be required before recognizing what is observed. The passage, as presented in the circulated translation, closes with a direct exhortation that Marduk has been present longer than human civilizations have existed, that what he reports will determine what follows, and that the conditions he encounters, and therefore what he reports, are shaped by collective and individual human choices. Viewers should understand clearly what kind of claim this closing represents. A 4,200-year-old text that identifies current observable phenomena as signs of an imminent visitation describes those signs as deliberately subtle so that no institutional confirmation is required, and closes by attributing the outcome to individual human choices, is structured in a way that places it outside any possibility of disconfirmation. A claim that predicts subtle, non-institutionally confirmable signs and attributes their absence or presence to human choices cannot be falsified through any currently available evidence. That structural feature is worth noting not as a reason to dismiss the text, but as a reason to hold it carefully rather than treating it as evidence of what it claims. It is worth pausing here to separate clearly what is established from what remains claimed and unverified. What can be independently verified? Larsa was a real and extensively excavated Sumerian city. The Yale Babylonian collection is a real institution, holding real cuneiform materials from Mesopotamian excavations. Marduk, Enki, Ninhursag, and Anu are genuine, extensively documented figures in authentic Sumerian and Babylonian religious literature. Babylonian astronomical record-keeping and predictive modeling are genuine and well-studied areas of Mesopotamian scholarship. Dr. Piotr Steinkeller is a real scholar with a documented published record in Sumerian studies. What has not been independently verified? The specific content of Tablet YBC 7194 as described in this account. The claim that Dr. Steinkeller produced a translation with this content that he chose not to publish. The astronomical reconstruction proposed by alternative researchers. Any of the specific translation content presented in this documentary. None of these claims appear in peer-reviewed assyriological literature in the form described. The Yale Babylonian collection has not publicly confirmed a tablet matching this description in the form claimed. What remains genuinely open? Whether a tablet matching this description exists in the Yale collection in the form claimed, and whether independent access could confirm or refute the proposed content. What is worth holding on to, regardless of the specific and unverified claims explored in this documentary, is a genuine historical reality. Ancient Mesopotamian civilization produced some of the most sophisticated astronomical and predictive literature in the ancient world, and genuine debates continue within mainstream scholarship about how best to interpret the cosmological frameworks embedded in authentic Sumerian and Babylonian religious texts. Those debates are worth following through peer-reviewed channels. Whether Tablet YBC 7194 adds anything genuine to that record, or whether the account explored here represents a modern synthesis built around real figures and real astronomical traditions, is a question that would require independent access to the original material and rigorous peer review to settle. Until then, the question remains open, and open questions, examined honestly and without being mistaken for answers, are where real understanding begins.